Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, we are diving into the topic of stimulants and addiction, a very complex topic, but one that's important to try and understand as best we can. So today, we are joined by an expert to help us do just that. Ian Hamilton is an honorary fellow and associate professor in addiction in the Department of Health Sciences at the University of York. He investigates the impact drug use has on individuals and populations and focuses on the social, health, and political issues related to drug and alcohol use. He writes a regular column for The Independent and provides opinion pieces for the British Medical Journal, as well as publishing academic papers. Prior to becoming an academic, Ian worked as a mental health nurse, working with people who had a severe mental health problem and used drugs or alcohol problematically. He also has experience of working with rough sleepers and people who are homeless. So, with this wealth of knowledge and varied experience, I'm excited to speak with Ian today. So, welcome to the show, Ian.
That's very kind of you, Sarah. Thank you.
Of course. So, to get us started, can you tell us a bit about your background and what compelled you to study addiction in particular?
Well, I think what really got me into all this was when I was training as a mental health nurse. I was fortunate enough to do a placement. You know, your training's made up of various placements. And what struck me about people with drug and alcohol problems was just actually, I guess, unlike other mental health problems, they were clearly, they'd kind of been bundled together, as it were. And that didn't make any sense to me. Although addiction clearly has mental health aspects to it. These were people who could be quite challenging verbally, not necessarily physically. So I found that really interesting, the group work, the counselling, all that kind of stuff. And it just intrigued me. You know, why is it one person may use a drug and develops a problem, another person uses a drug and doesn't develop a problem? So that was what got me into it, really.
Yeah, that is really fascinating, finding those differences between people. And I'm sure that those placements were really interesting to be on as well.
Yeah, definitely.
To introduce us to our topic today a little bit, what would you say are some common misconceptions about stimulants?
Well, I think there's some common misconceptions about drugs generally, and that would include stimulants. So it depends who you are. There's no universal answer to that. But for some people, there may be a false sense of security or safety in stimulants because they also have a medical use, like many drugs do. People think that, you know, it's okay to use them because if doctors are prescribing them or people are using them for health conditions, then they must be safe. There's also, I think, it reminds me a bit of alcohol, actually, because people tend to think of an alcoholic as someone who has to have a drink first thing in the morning. And I think the same thing that applies to other drugs like stimulants. People think, oh, I only have a problem with a stimulant if I'm using it every day, rather than maybe once a week or using it quite intensely, but infrequently. So I think there's a number of misperceptions around stimulants and other drugs generally.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, before we dive deeper into our topic, that's a great introduction, but we'd like to take the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So, to start us off, do you have a favorite book or one that you'd like to recommend?
Well, it may not be the most academic or intellectual book, but I've just been reading The Diary of a Nobody, which is basically a novel, not a novel, sorry, a diary, as it would suggest, of a Victorian guy, and it's quite funny, really. It's quite pedestrian. It's just about his day-to-day life and the various things that happen. It's not a thick tome. It's only about 150 pages, But because it's a diary and it's written in that way, I quite like it because I can pick it up and put it down. I don't have to give an hour to it or whatever. So I'm afraid that's how shallow I am. I quite like something light-hearted and funny and something I can pick up and drop. Partly because, as you know, as an academic, you're kind of doing a lot of reading. You're either reading students' essays or you're reading work that you're preparing for a published paper or whatever. So it's quite nice to have something that isn't quite so heavy and topic related.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we don't always have to talk about academics and research here.
No.
Do you have a movie that you've enjoyed recently?
Not a movie, but there's a series here in the UK called It's Our City, and I'm afraid it is a busman's holiday because it is about drug dealing. But and it's drug dealing in Liverpool, so it's a family called the Stimulants who basically dominate the Liverpool drug market. But interestingly, this series, this drama, it does include, all the stuff about drug dealing, but it gives the backstory to this family. So, for instance, one of the sons and his wife have problems with subfertility and are going through IVF. So actually, I think it helps us, or to my mind, it helps us get away from the stereotypical view of drug dealers and actually look at what's happening in people's lives, and maybe it gives us a clues to why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that sounds really insightful, actually. I might have to have a look. And my next question for you is, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
Well, I'm listening and involved, which I know is shameless, but there's a company over here called YouGov, and they're a polling institution. So they, do political polls, but they do a load of lifestyle polls as well. Lifestyle polls, sorry. And they do a series called Britain is a Nation of, and depending on the podcast, it could be. So the last one we did was Britain is a Nation of Alcoholics, which clearly we're not, but it's just to get us kind of talking around an issue. And obviously what YouGov bring to that is they bring data, albeit, survey data. It's not hardcore scientific data, but nonetheless, it's got a value. So it's quite interesting looking at those themes and, and also I listen to the ones I'm not involved in. So I don't do that many, but so some really interesting ones, it touches on I don't think we've done on we've not done one on longevity, so I might have to suggest that to them.
Yeah, that's really cool. And next up, I wanted to ask if you have a role model. Now, this could be professionally or in your personal life, if you like.
I think I've both. So as well as an academic, and I have I've been really fortunate to have some mentors throughout my academic career who haven't necessarily been my managers, my line managers, but people that I've taken to, and fortunately they've given me their time and their wisdom and their the benefit of their experience, and I'm really grateful. So Professor Charlie Lloyd, who really is a criminologist and happens to work at York, the same university as myself. And I have a lot of time for Charlie. He's a quiet academic. He's not like me. He doesn't run around doing podcasts and things. He works quietly in the background, but his work is really important, and his insights have been really helpful. And he's been very generous with his time. And then out of that, I've kept sheep for a number of years. So there's people around me who have really helped, local farmers, sheep farmers. And also I work at a sheep market once a week. So that's been really helpful in helping me understand sheep. And you can never know enough, is my view.
Yeah, of course. That's fascinating. I love that. And finally, on sort of the inspiration side of things, is there a course or a class that you've taken that has inspired you, or maybe one that you've taught?
I wouldn't be so bold as to say one I've taught, but I've certainly, I was fortunate enough to do a master's in research at York. So that course really did inspire me because it gave me some insight into, it was quite diverse. So it was everything from health policy through to the sociology of health, and also, specific research methods as well. So it may sound a little dry, but actually the professors that we had on each of those modules really brought the subject to life. They knew it really well. They were passionate about it. And that's so infectious. You can't help but being, energized and intrigued by someone who is really passionate about the subject, even if it's not something you thought would interest you. So I guess that's been my take home from doing that course.
Yeah, I always say the same thing. I always say that, a teacher can really make a subject if they're passionate, even if you know nothing about it. And yeah, it's fascinating. So, what we're going to do now is dive into our topic, and we're going to start out with a few definitions just to get those underway. So, how would you define longevity?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question because we, right across the Western world, we tend to think of how long people live, and particularly populations, don't we? So we compare Australia with Japan, with the UK, with America, and we view that, don't we? If people live, I don't know, there's obviously a difference between how long men and women live. It tends to be women live longer than men, but we use that as kind of metric to say how well a nation's doing or a population's doing. And I get that, but that's not the whole story, because you can live to 90, but your quality of life from 60 to 90 can be dreadful. You can be really physically ill, you can be immobile. So longevity to me is about quality of life. It's not just about the number that you reach. So I'm 60. I retired a couple of years ago because I wanted my retirement to be full of healthy years. And also I should say I was fortunate enough to be able to retire. But I think it's important that we view longevity not just as a number, but as a quality as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was even just listening to someone this morning saying about how people are wanting to increase their healthy years as opposed to,
Yeah,
going into a decline too early, and sort of some of the health
yeah.
things around that. So that was very interesting.
Well,
So,
interestingly, health economists have captured that. There's DALYs, which is disability adjusted life years, which is a technical term really for what you've just described.
yeah, absolutely. So, secondly, for our topic today, can you explain what stimulants are?
Yeah, I mean, I think stimulants are something almost everyone has tried or experienced, bizarrely. That may sound odd, but, stimulants include caffeine or nicotine. And given the success of Starbucks and Costa, and I don't know what you guys have, what other brands do you have in over there?
We don't have that many chain coffee. I mean, we have the coffee club. That's kind of food as
Right.
well.
Okay.
I'm familiar with Costa. I've
Yeah,
been to the
yeah.
UK a couple times. Um, quite
Do
like
do
it
you
there.
drink as much coffee as us, do you think?
Oh, I would say more. Yeah.
Right, okay.
I don't know the statistics though, so
No,
don't
no,
quote
no,
me on
no.
that.
That's cool. But I mean, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, isn't it? So if, I don't think everybody would think about caffeine as a stimulant particularly, but caffeine is a classic everyday example of a stimulant. But more broadly, or more precisely, a stimulant is any substance that would do things like increase alertness, focus, make you feel energized, um, and also perhaps confident as well. That's another aspect of a stimulant. I'm not sure that's particularly the case with caffeine, but certainly when you get to drugs like cocaine, which clearly is a stronger stimulant or a more potent stimulant. So yeah, it's if I had to use a bit of jargon, a bit of slang, it would be an upper. We call them uppers. So the word gives it away. Anything that's going to increase your motivation, your energy, your mood, and how you feel.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. So, how would you say that stimulants then interact with the brain to produce those effects?
Well, I've got to kind of provide a bit of indemnity from the start. Is we don't actually know a lot about how stimulants work, and if I can start backwards by giving an example of how little we know.
Mm,
Um, so if you think about something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, most people are familiar with ADHD. Um, And one of the ways that plays out ADHD is people tend to be, from the outside, they look overstimulated, don't they? They're very energetic, they're on the go and all the rest of it. And yet we use drugs like Ritalin, which are a stimulant, to treat ADHD. Now, to me, that just, how can that be? Why would you treat someone who's overactive with stimulant? Surely you would use a depressant, would you not? So to my mind, that gives us a very clear indicator that we still don't understand all that we need to about stimulants. But to go back to your original point, more broadly, whether it's caffeine, crack cocaine, amphetamine, whatever it is, all those classes of stimulants will increase your central nervous system. And most people know the central nervous system because it gives you the fight or flight reaction. So bumblebee comes towards you. Most people aren't that chill around bumblebees or wasps, so they'll immediately have an autonomic response to that, and that's your central nervous system kicking in and telling you, you need to be alert and aware and doing something. And in turn, what your central nervous system does is clearly stimulate neural activity in the brain. So it's getting you to respond, and that's how you stay alive. I'm not saying a bee sting would kill you, but there are other incidents where it's kind of your fight or flight response is pretty crucial, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's a really good example with ADHD that we don't fully know how it works. Would you say that, I mean, I know there's quite a few different types of ADHD medicines out there, and that there's also two types, I believe, of ADHD that people get diagnosed with. There's hyperactive and inattentive. And I guess you're kind of talking about more so the hyperactive, but people have
Yeah,
both. So
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it
So,
is sometimes important just to recognise how little we know, and that's not to scare anyone or to be critical. It's just to be realistic, because a lot of stuff gets written, a lot of stuff gets talked about stimulants and a whole range of other drugs as well. But when you look at the evidence and the science, we can maybe explain the actions of some drugs, but we don't understand how they work or don't work.
yeah, absolutely. So, given what you've said so far, how would you describe the relationship between stimulant usage and longevity?
Well, it's complex. Uh, I've already said that stimulants have a medical use. So, in terms of longevity, if you take, for example, someone who has asthma or a respiratory problem, and they're given, a stimulant as a medicine, then that's contributing to longevity, not just in chronological years, but as we said, quality of life. Flip that, and you're someone who has, let's say, used stimulants recreationally, but problematically. Um, Most seriously, it can end up in fatal overdose. So that puts a very firm brake on longevity. That kills them.
Mm,
So it's not a one size fits all, and I don't think anyone will be particularly surprised to hear that. So it's going to vary a bit by person, and even within one life, it may vary. So people may have a different relationship as they go through life with stimulants.
yeah, absolutely. So, to go a little deeper, then, can you tell us a bit about the common reasons that you find most often of why people would use stimulants?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to sell stimulants here, but if you think about what stimulants do, if they increase your energy, improve your focus, your concentration, your confidence, all those aspects can be married to people who have deficits in those aspects, can't they? So in other words, if you don't feel confident, if you feel tired, um, if you feel you lack concentration and focus, then I guess what I tell you what always surprises me, Sarah, is people find solutions to their own problems, irrespective of how long I've trained or other health professionals around me have trained, and people are ingenious at finding solutions to their own problems. That's what I find absolutely remarkable. So people will seek out things that they know are effective. Um, so for example, one of the things certain stimulants do is suppress appetite. So if you're overweight, or you're obese, then a stimulant is going to work very well for you, and people suss that out very quickly. And it may work, undoubtedly it will work for many people. However, there's a price to pay for that. It's not toll free, so you may find that your weight is reduced, but you then become physically and psychologically dependent on stimulants. So they have that capacity, along with a range of other drugs, to create a dependency profile. I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten what the question was now, Sarah. Just
No,
remind me.
that's okay. So the question originally was the common reasons behind why people
Oh,
use
yes.
stimulants. I think you
Yeah.
have kind of answered that. Yeah.
I mean, it's also worth looking back through history. In World War II, soldiers and pilots were given stimulants, you know, and that was endorsed by their government, so they could stay awake longer, eat less, and concentrate better. And we see that actually in parts of Africa now, in war-torn parts of Africa, where stimulants are commonly used in warfare for the same reason. If food is scarce, but there is people who are in combat zones actively fighting and need to stay awake and concentrate. So stimulants, have a long history of being used in warfare, for example, and continue to be used that way.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know about that actually. So, what then are some of the negative effects that these stimulants have on our long term health? This could be either physically or neurologically.
So yeah, the price that you pay using stimulants in the long term, even if you're still using them rather than abruptly stopping them, is commonly what we see is things like agitation, panic, so severe anxiety, aggression, hostility, and even not for everyone, but for some people, an increase in suicidal ideation. So that thinking around suicide. And unfortunately, for some people, it does actually result in suicide.
Mm,
So there's quite a heavy price to pay for stimulant use. And that's why I think whether you're using stimulants with or without a prescription, obviously I would encourage medical supervision, but I wouldn't take any reassurance from the fact that you're using a stimulant in a prescribed way. I still think you need medical intervention if you're on a long-term dose of a stimulant. I think for the other group I was mentioning is people who maybe abruptly stop using a stimulant, um, and that really concerns me. That's a group that I would be really worried about, because I think the effects can be quite drastic. So it's everything I mentioned around agitation, etc., but it's amplified. It's more intense because your body and your mind doesn't have the stimulant on board. Um, the main effect physically is cardiovascular, so it's on your heart. Stimulants increase blood pressure, pulse rate, and breathing. So if you abruptly stop a stimulant, you get the reverse. So you go back to whatever normal is, but that won't feel normal to you. So yeah, they're I don't want to scare people, but they are they're a powerful group of drugs. They're not shouldn't be thought about in the same light as we might think about cannabis, for instance, or drugs like that. They have potential to be quite powerful and quite toxic.
yeah, that's really interesting and a very thorough answer. And since we're now talking about chronic use, could you tell us how addiction is typically defined?
Well, to my mind, addiction is both clinically and empirically, the easiest way to define addiction is what happens in the absence of the substance. So, if you withdraw the substance either deliberately or, I don't know, let's say someone gets arrested and goes into prison and they don't have access to it, uh, what happens? How do you feel? What's your thinking like? Um, so that may sound a bit brief, but I kind of like brief and simple.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so, what are some signs that an individual might be addicted to a stimulant?
Yeah, there's so many. Some of them will be stimulant orientated, others are more generalized. So to start off with, the generalized stuff is a preoccupation with stimulants. So, when's my next dose? Where am I going to get it? How strong is it? How's it going to make me feel? So it uses up, in other words, a lot more of your thinking time. But also maybe your physical time. Maybe you have to go and work an extra shift to pay for your prescription, or to pay if you don't have a prescription, to pay to get the drugs. What impact is it having on those around you? Your family, your partner, your children, because it will. You can't use a stimulant and it not have an effect on those around you. It might be a good effect, but the chances are it probably isn't. So they'll see a change in you. So that's the other thing, if people started commenting on your behavior and how you are, does that irritate you? How do you react to that? Are you able to do less of what you were able to do before? So for instance, we've mentioned, haven't we, the come down from stimulants. So do you find those come downs harder, longer? In other words, for the day that you use stimulants, are you then paying back a day or two in recovering? So I think there's some general things around, you could apply that to almost any drug, but then there are very specific things that will apply to stimulants. And we've kind of, I'm not repeating myself, but it's worth reiterating the effect it has on your breathing, your blood pressure, your heart rate, as well as the cognitive stuff like your concentration, focus, motivation. So all of those.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so, what do you find makes people get addicted to stimulants in the first place?
I think that's quite difficult in a way, because it will vary. But if we think about what the effects of a stimulant are, you can see why some people are drawn to them. So if it does make you feel more energized, focused, you can concentrate, maybe even more confident, then one exposure might be enough to maybe deal with a deficit that you have in any of those areas. Or let's not medicalize it. Let's just say that you like it. It's a nice feeling. It's a feeling that we all feel like that. Do you know what I mean? If you think about yourself on your best day, where you're really motivated, really energized, you can concentrate, and you feel really confident, that's a lovely set of feelings to have. So, hey, when you then try a drug or a stimulant that gives you those same feelings, you can think, well, why should I wait until this naturally occurs again? I found something that can induce this straight away. So I think it's an attractive drug to some people.
So it almost like makes it easier in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to really medicalize it, what we talk about is self-medicating. People are medicating for a deficit or a problem that they already have, and they found the solution through stimulants. The great thing about drugs and stimulants, again, I'm not trying to sell them, is they have no waiting list. They have no intrusive assessment. They're available 24/7. Invariably, they're affordable for most people. So you compare that to, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the UK, you typically wait quite a few days to see a doctor. The doctor's going to ask you a number of questions. Why would you go through all that when you can just, through social media or however it is you access drugs or stimulants, or through a friend or whatever, get one here and now? So I just to be clear, I'm not endorsing that, but if you want to sort of zoom back and just be objective about it, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I asked you before, what are some signs that an individual may be addicted to a stimulant? Now, this might be a similar question, but what are some signs that an individual might be at risk of becoming addicted?
Well, I think it's going to be a mixture of what the person notices themselves and what those around them notice. So I think a bit like I was saying before, for the individual, if they feel they're a bit more preoccupied by the stimulant, so they're spending more time thinking about it, perhaps looking forward to using it, spending more money on it, and crucially, finding it harder to go without. So if you said to yourself, I'm only going to use it at the weekend, and then you get to Wednesday, you think, God, I feel really rubbish. I know what would make me feel better. That's a good indication that tolerance and dependence are both an issue. I think outside of yourself, because it can be, we're great at denying things that are going on in our lives. It can be that irksome thing of a partner, family member, friend saying, hey, you don't seem yourself. Either, you're full of energy, or the reverse, you seem really flat, or you just don't seem yourself. And people noticing things about your behavior or the way you are, or even just wanting to meet up and be with people, those kind of things. So I think there can be a number of indicators. But my feeling is that most people who have a problem know they have a problem. Whether they'll admit it to somebody else or even to themselves is another thing. But most people I've met in my clinical experience know they have a problem.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't know they've got a problem. They might have difficulty knowing how to deal with it. That's more of an issue. But, you don't need to hammer it home to them that they've got a problem. They're acutely aware of that.
Very interesting. So, on that, why do you think, and this is a little bit of a different question actually, but one that's very fascinating to me. Why do some people seem more prone to stimulant addiction than others do? Is it purely genetic, or are there environmental and psychological factors at play in that?
Personally, I think there's an interaction between environment and genetics. So we typically see what we call intergenerational problems with drugs, including stimulants. So, grandparent to parent to child. And that can't be a coincidence. The difficulty is separating that out, because, of course, we might, have some fancy pants research that shows, gene ARZ234 is present in them all. But that doesn't tell the full story. Because, of course, how do you separate out the way that role modeling has happened? How people, a parent deals with anger or happiness or joy or sadness or depression, and role models that to the child by using a stimulant to counter that effect. So there can be a number of environmental cues that, like the ones I've just mentioned. But personally, I because we don't know enough, I'm going to cut myself by sitting on the fence and saying it is a mixture of environment and genetics, and we probably are just at the cusp of genetic understanding. We don't, we've got a tiny view into what's going on. We have a much better understanding of the environmental aspects at the moment, anyway.
Yeah, it's very complicated, and the science is, always developing. So we often find on this show that there are things we talk about when it comes to health, and especially when it comes to the brain, that we don't actually know the answers. So
I mean, all I would
that's
say
okay.
is if it was weighted towards genetics, that's pretty damning, because where does that leave you? It's like having a cancer marker or whatever, isn't it? It's kind of almost inevitable. So the optimist in me hopes that most of it is environmental, because we can, that's more malleable, to my mind. But hey ho, we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe AI will solve it for us, and we'll know in a year's time. I don't know. I doubt it.
Maybe. But that is very interesting, actually. So I want to move on now to our practices and habits section. Now, this is where I want to ask you what habit you would recommend people practicing when it comes to either managing an addiction or a risk of an addiction coming into play in their life.
Without doubt, the best thing you can do is have a break, have a regular break. So, for instance, in the UK, to give you an example, our chief medical officer advises that with alcohol, you have 2 dry days a week. And I think you could apply that to every drug. I think if you, not say 2 days, but if you have a regular break from using stimulants, that to me is one of the best things you can do, because it breaks tolerance, and it also gives you some insight into where you're at. How uncomfortable is that break psychologically and physically? So it's a good, if you like, thermometer, emotional, psychological, physical thermometer of where you're at with stimulants. So take a regular break.
Mm, that's very interesting. And I can imagine that people might have a difficulty with doing that. What do you find are the most common challenges with trying to take that regular break?
Well, no, I think that's really that offers some useful intelligence. If it is difficult,
Mm,
then that's an indication you need some support. You can't do it by yourself. Um, so, I know it's a cliche, but you kind of, until you admit you've got a problem, you can't sort it. So I think if it gets to the point where you're really struggling, it's proving to be really difficult to go without a stimulant and really uncomfortable, there is so much support out there that's available. And the first thing to do is mention it to somebody. I'll give you a little example. I bought some sneakers, trainers at Christmas with the view of going running. Uh, they still didn't come out of the box. And I didn't tell anyone what I was going to do. If I'd said to my family or my wife, I've bought some trainers because I intend to go running, then I've got a social contract. And there's shame and pride involved. And I think the same applies to seeking support. Once you've expressed that need or that vulnerability, I think that's really crucial. And I think the majority of people respond well to that. They won't be, point the finger or whatever. And also, there's obviously professional support you can get as well as support from your own kind of family networks and whatnot. So I think that's a really critical thing to do.
yeah, that's very interesting and great advice as well for anybody who might be struggling with that. And just generally for people to know that taking a break is the best thing that you can do and that it's recommended. So now I'd like to move on to our open mic segment. Now, this is an interesting segment where it's your chance to talk about anything that you might be passionate about. It doesn't even have to be related to our topic or what we've talked about so far. So the floor is yours.
Well, I want to talk about sheep because I love sheep.
Go on.
So we've just we host some uh, what we call breeding ewes, which means they're in lamb, and we just last week finished lambing. So to me, this is a really special time of year. It's hard work um, because obviously it involves looking out for things day and night, but it's such a lovely time of year. If I could turn the camera around, I would. But if I could turn the camera around, there's a field full of lambs behind me, and they're jumping around all over the place. Some of them are only 2 weeks old, some are 4 or 5 weeks old, and they're just so much fun. They're full of literally the joys of spring, and that has an effect on us as well. It just lifts our spirits a bit, and also the weather's better. It's sunny, it's warm. We've got out of winter and all the rest of it.
I'm
Um,
jealous.
yeah. So yeah, we're really fortunate, and the thing that we've done this year that we haven't done before is we used to have some really kind of special breeds called Suffolk sheep and pure Texel sheep, and we decided to get what are called mule sheep. So they're not the most handsome things, but my God, what a difference it makes. The special breeds that we had made really hard work of lambing. It got really complicated. Uh, we'd have some Suffolk ewes that would give birth to twins, look at them, and then just walk away. Um, but these mule ewes that we have are such good mothers. They lamb really easily. So um, I think we'll be sticking with our mule ewes for the next few years rather than going for fancy pants breeds that are hard work. And I guess the reason some of these breeds are rare is because they are such hard work. So I kind of should have realised, really, but I'm a slow learner.
Mm.
So yeah, we were sticking with mule ewes from now on.
I think I can see something behind your window just now. What's out
Oh,
there at the
that's
moment?
our cats.
Ah, it's a cat.
Sausage and sizzle, we call them.
Oh,
Uh,
beautiful. That's great. Well, to be honest, I wasn't expecting to learn about lambing on this
right.
episode of the podcast, but I think it's a fantastic break. And just to go back for a moment to um, our topic for today, if our listeners want to find out more about you yourself and the work that you've done, where should they go? And also, if you would like, what are some resources that people might need?
I mean, it'd be great. It's always nice if people are interested in your work, and you can just Google who I am, Ian Hamilton at York, and it should come up. But I think probably what's more important is looking into resources around stimulants generally. And I would, I think, to be honest, the Australian government does some really good work around this. They provide some really good information, Department of Health, around drugs. So I would look at that. The other organisation I would recommend is an organisation called DrugWise, because they're independent, they're non-political, and they provide neutral information. It's not judgmental. It's not, as I say, political in any way. Good evidence-based information around drugs and ways to get support as well. So both those, the Australian government's Department of Health website and DrugWise.
Great. I will put those links in the show notes for our listeners as well as links to you. And yeah, I've heard of DrugWise as well. So there you go. So I'd like to conclude our episode now. Thank you so much for joining us. I've certainly learned a lot from you, and I hope that our audience has as well. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.